I'm going to introduce Werner Kindsmuller, and he is the vice president of BVF in Germany. It's a public transport company, and he is responsible for strategic issues. And pertinent to this meeting, he had presented a paper entitled Aviation Must Leave Growth Course. And he is going to be speaking on German campaigners' vision for the future. So I wish to introduce Werner Kindsmuller to address our body. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Arlene, for introducing me. Well, I have given my presentation the title Rethink Air Traffic, and this indicates that I'm not only talking on noise, but I think we have to widen our view, and we have to get a holistic approach, strategic approach on this issue. And the undertitle is For Sustainable Air Transport. Well, you know that this is sustainability is United Nations goal, national goals. And I think when we will be successful with our fights, we have to get into line with this global goal, the sustainability. And I will explain this the next minutes. According to a survey in Germany, there are 800,000 people heavily affected, seriously affected by aircraft noise. This is less than 1% of the population. So that means politically that national governments have not cared much about us. And this raises the question, how can we get broader support from the public, which is not directly affected by aircraft noise? And what kind of coalitions we can build in order to be successful? Well, Germany, as most of the other countries here, will achieve climate neutrality until 2045, zero pollution. Until today, air traffic doesn't contribute to achieve this goal. So this is the state of the art for our considerations, which has led to a 16-point position paper our organization has adopted. And the key demand in this paper is that we must continuously reduce the number of aircraft movements in order to achieve our other goals. But how can we achieve this goal? So I skip this and go to the next slide. Well, look at this. You see what was flying in the 1950 and what is today. Today it is a mass event, a disgusting mass event, and it has been a luxury product 70 years ago. And this is the problem we are facing now. And if you look on the figures, you can see that we had an enormous incline. The passengers from 1950 to now or better said, until the COVID pandemic. Over the past 20 years, the number of passengers has tripled. And after the historic decline, after 2019, airlines and airports now are trying to build on the growth trajectory from which a virus has dissuaded them again. And that is the situation. Well, let me ask, how will air transport develop in the future? And if you're looking on the trends, we can see a contradictory development. On the one side, demand for low-cost flights continues to rise. We could see this in the summer. The industry is in disastrous conditions. In Germany, for example, this year, we could see chaotic pictures from the airports. In many, excuse me, another thing is that some airlines are facing serious financial problems. And the aviation industry is in crisis. They have problems with maintenance and delivery of turbines and so on and so on. So this means that we are just now in a situation where we have something like a crossing. Will we follow the economic way of growth, or will we follow the climate path in the future, the path to sustainability, knowing that flying never will be sustainable and never will be climate neutral? So we know that the air transport is the dirtiest form of mobility. Nevertheless, it is legally privileged in nearly all countries, and it is highly subsidized with tax revenues. In Germany, it's 12 billion through tax exemptions only a year. So, and this is a contradiction to the climate goals. And as we have discussed today, it terrorizes people who live near an airport with noise, and the costs of the air transportation for the general public, we have to take this. So, well, this slide shows that the airlines did not contribute to the goals set down in Paris 2015. The airlines are the most emission damaging form of transport. So, and there are lobbyists of the aviation industry which tell us fairy tale of climate neutral aircraft and sustainable flying. This is all nonsense and only serves to ensure that the industry can continue as before. There will not be a solution by SAF or power to liquid. This never will lead to climate neutral air transport. So now I'm coming into the question how to deal with this. Well, we have a double task. We want to reduce emissions, and on the other side, we want to reduce aircraft noise. The answer is very simple. We have to reduce the number of aircraft movements. This is the only way we can go. And this is why we have laid down a 16-point program where we have laid out a comprehensive catalog, and you see some of our demands on this slide. Well, one way is to reduce short-haul flights up to 600 kilometers by the end of this decade. But if we would succeed in this, we do not want that the capacities freed up by the abandonment of short-haul flights, that they are used for medium or long-haul flights. That is why we are calling for a 3% annual reduction in slots at all airports. This is our core demand. And as already discussed today, the air tickets must express the true price. This means that the externalities must be included in the price. This also means that subsidies have to be abolished and aviation must be included in emission trading, but not like Corsa, but a real emission trading. And finally, airlines must be held accountable for the damage they cause through noise and emissions, for example, for our health system. That is why we are calling for an increase in the pollutant component in land charges and a fund into which airlines must pay and from which cities and citizens are compensated. So I now come to our main demand. Well, if we want that we achieve our climate goals, we need to have reduction goals for the air transport. Until now, air traffic doesn't contribute to the reduction goals. So if you want to be successful in the public, you have to focus on one point only. And our point with our strategy, with our campaign, we want to start next year is that we have to reduce the capacity of the slots on the airports. So this means that we are calling for a legislative act to reduce the airport slots 3% per year. And to achieve this political goal, we try to build a strategic coalition of anti-aircraft noise movement and the environmental movement. This is very important for us. So we can bring together two strong movements. So one concrete measure we want to launch next year is that we start lobbying at all political levels for this demand, that we start a petition to the Bundestag to get a new legislation, and that we focus all our activities on making this demand strong. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Werner. I can't. If you stop sharing your screen, that would be great. That was really interesting and broadened out the discussion. I can only see a few people for the moment. So I can see Colin. So if you want to go ahead, and then other hands may be up. I can't see people. I think we need to. You're gone, Colin.
I think our Mel Thomas was first. Shall I give over to her?
Okay, you're a gent. I didn't see Armel's hand because I can only see 5 people on the screen at the moment. But on you go, Armel.
Thank you very much, Colin. Well, what has been said is fine, but if you actually stop, if you have demand management in Germany, and of course Frankfurt is with Amsterdam and Paris, they are the 3 competitors to Heathrow. Then what will happen is that Heathrow will have a very good reason to say, well, we need a 3rd runway because people can't go from Frankfurt, Paris or Amsterdam. So, hey, we need to have more space here. And in January, John Hollenkay told us at the meeting we had on the 20th of October that he is going to give us an update on the 3rd runway. And that's not going to be, well, we don't need it. So I think, while it's a very, very good and laudable idea, it needs to be done in Europe. And it's not because we are not in the EU that we are not in Europe. The whole of the main airport in Europe and the people who are activists actually need to fight so that you don't shift, the people from Paris, because that's what Heathrow has been saying for years. If we don't increase at Heathrow, they will go to Paris, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt. Paris, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt have already capped their night flights, their passengers, and their number of flights. Heathrow is still going ahead. We need to have a decision which is actually European, not just in Germany. Thank you.
It's absolutely right, Armel. Can I just, we're running a little bit short of time, but just to say that I think one of the roles that UECNA hopes to play is doing that, is bringing the European groups together, because what Werner's outlined is superb, but it does need European backing. Colin, it really is your turn now.
Yeah, thank you. So in my experience, climate change and noise are somewhat unhappy bedfellows. I'm an XR activist, and I got involved with aviation issues through the climate issues. And I've ended up switching over to the noise side primarily, though, of course, noise, emissions, pollution are all related. And as soon as I mention climate change to most of the people in the noise community, they run over the hills because they don't want to be associated with any climate activists. So it's a very difficult tightrope to walk, to bring in the different groups without disenfranchising others. But somehow we have to do it because they are all related.
Yeah.
Thanks, Colin. And we'll take Bertolt, and I think, Peter, you really have your hand up. You were up. I think you had the wrong hand up for a minute. You were applauding everybody, but we like you for it. But we'll take Bertolt first, and then Peter, and then I'm going to then we'll move on. Bertolt.
Yes, I'm coming from Frankfurt, and this year in Frankfurt there occurs what very special. The airport had reduced the number of slots during the flight plan period in summer, and this situation was never considered before. And I think there will be a new slot regulation. And I think the slot regulation should consider also the possibility to reduce the number of slots. And this number of slots must be reduced if we have not the capacity for all slots. And this situation we had in Frankfurt. The capacity is are not also only the buildings, but also not only the number of the buildings, but also the number of people working on the airport, and the number of people the capacity and the number of slots are linked. And if you reduce the number of people, you must reduce the number of slots. And in Frankfurt, we have reduced the number of people during the pandemic. And so we had to reduce the number of slots. And now we should, especially in Germany, we have a situation where more people leave the reach, will be retired than young people. The number of employees decreases, and so we have the situation that we must not create places for work for every price, and we can reduce the number of people at airports, especially at airports. And then we can also reduce the number of slots, and must reduce the number of slots. And the new regulation of the slots should have should include regulations for the reducing of number of slots, especially if the capacity is not, if we have not the capacity for all slots.
Thank you for that, Bertold. And in fact, in next year, UECNA is hoping to do a webinar on slots, and I think we'll be getting people from Frankfurt to lead that webinar. Peter, you almost have certainly the last word from the floor.
I'm Peter Willen, Richmond, Heathrow campaign. Werner showed a very interesting graph of 4 billion commercial passengers currently. I believe about 60% of those are international and 40% are domestic. In the UK, it's quite different because 98% of ours are international. But my first question is, we have a serious problem in that ICAO, as I understand it, only deals with international flights on carbon, and COP27 deals with domestic flights, and the two are not linked up necessarily in the best of ways. So we have a major issue there of structure, who's dealing with what. And the second point I'd like to make is this, that if you look at the projections by ICAO and by IATA for growth in passengers, this was last year based on the 2018 4 billion commercial passengers. It rises to 10 billion by 2045 or thereabouts. And I know they've revised these figures recently, and we haven't studied them, but they're still gigantic. So we're not even anywhere near beginning. And we have raised this frequently with our government, with our airport Heathrow, and they totally dismiss the idea of demand management, notwithstanding that this is prescribed by our climate change committee and in law, that demand will be managed in order to meet net zero and the Paris Agreement. So there are a couple of points there, John. One is the disjoint on ICAO and COP27, and really how are we going to reduce 3% a year when we're talking about 3% of growth by the industry?
No, they're good points, Peter. I don't know whether, Werner, you've got any final thoughts on this.
Well, yes, just two remarks. Well, I don't see that there is a conflict between the anti-noise movement and the environment news, not necessarily. Maybe we have to talk to each other to understand each other better than we do today. But I think that's possible, and we have very positive experiences made on the municipality level, working together. The second is that well, we have to leave the growth path for the air transport everywhere in Europe, everywhere out of Europe. And so I don't think that there must be a shift from one airport to the next. Indeed, it would be it is a very good idea to try, as John said, a European-wide approach to this question, how we can reduce the slots everywhere. But practically, we have to bring it down on the national and on the airport level, because the legislation is a national legislation, how we can reduce these slots on the specific airports. So we can make to a strategic umbrella on the European side, but concretely legislation, we have to find national solutions. And to what Peter said, well, it's right that we have a problem today that, for example, in Germany, the emissions abroad doesn't count in the German statistics. Yeah, so that we only have the figures of domestic flights. And I'm sure that there is a lot of, well, unconcrete figures, and this is a hole we have to solve. But I think we should not forget that we tend to make things more complicated so that we have problems to communicate and to mobilize people which are not already affected. So we make things more easier. Yeah, we have to find, and this was the focus on my presentation, how we can get more and broader influence. So we must reduce the complexity of our subject.
Thank you very much, Werner, and thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Arlene, for chairing. Now we've got 5 minutes left, and how we're going to do it is I'm going to do a very quick summary and then hand over to Dominique to close. I summarized the morning session, and I won't do that again, but just to repeat, we will be producing we'll put stuff on our website. We'll also produce a special newsletter, which will contain the key points. I think some of the key points coming out from this afternoon session was that I thought Marco was really very positive about how we can use the EU directive and possibly a revised directive. Now, I appreciate that applies just to people within the EU, but very often what happens in the EU can have knock-on effects in the UK and in other countries as well. So I thought that was positive. I thought also Marco covered one of the points we raised this morning about the cost-benefit analysis. You know, what is the cost of noise? What is the cost of health? There seems to be a lot of information within the EU. It's a point our friends from Portugal raised. There's a lot of information there, which I think we can use. The third point is the interesting point Marco made about trying to persuade our authorities to go for a noise reduction objective. It's a good idea, but as our friend from Belgium said, it's probably not the only thing that we press for. Turning to Tim's presentation, he argued strongly, and I think rightly, that we need to use a number of different metrics, possibly health-based metrics. And he made the interesting point that the metrics that may be useful for policymakers are not the same metrics that are understandable by the general public. And that is something we can repeat time and time again to our airports. The sixth point is the point that Armel raised about respite. We need a clear definition. Respite is terribly important. We want a break from the noise, but it needs to be clearly defined. And I think this is something we need to press for. And related to that was what Colin said, is if you're affected by more than one airport, you want respite from both airports at the same time. And it's important that all the airports work together. And I think that applies to probably a number of people on the call. And finally, Werner said, look, let's widen this. We need to see if we can find partners elsewhere. I think we do need to aim to make links with the climate campaigners, but I agree with Colin that it's not always a natural fit. But nevertheless, the broad point is right, Werner, that we need to widen our coalition of support. And what essentially you were saying was, let's find ways of reducing the number of aircraft. That requires reduction of number of slots and the other very interesting points which you illustrated in your slides. Just before I hand back to Dominique, just to say that we are having a webinar on the Monday, the 5th of December at 5 o'clock Brussels time. They only last for an hour, so that's, sorry, it's 6 o'clock Brussels time. I'll say that again, Monday, the 5th of December, 6 o'clock Brussels time, going on for an hour. And we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to make it a question and answer session, because what I sensed was that there's still questions people have. There's still discussions that need to be had. And so it's almost like a follow-up hour to this conference. We'll be doing that, as I say, on the 5th of December, and we'll let you all know the details, and we'll put it on social media, etc. So that's it from me. And just to hand back to Dominique for a final few words.